Well, hello, everyone. We've just ticked over 11 a.m. and we've got quite a few attendees that have signed in. So I'll start to get underway. Welcome. Thank you for dialing in. Welcome to this, the next in our webinar series. My name is Grant Ballantyne, and I will be moderating this webinar. And I hope that when you dial in, this finds you all and your loved ones safe and well in this time of uncertainty. And I hope that you enjoy this webinar as we discuss how we solving site problems from the home office. As a start, and before, just to allow some additional attendees to dial in if they're dialing in late, having technical problems, we start all of our meetings with a values moment at Ausenco, and I just thought this is a good opportunity to do a values moment about our neighbours, since we are all working from home at the moment. Although I've come into the office today in search of better internet coverage, most of us are working at home at the moment, and our neighbours are our new co-workers. So I think there's a really great opportunity in this time to extend our networks in our neighbourhood, to check on the elderly that are most at risk around us, and also, of course, the extroverts who are really struggling in this time. To share resources, whether that's baking, fruit, veggies, or gardening equipment. I've been baking a lot of bread for my neighbours, and it's really develops the community in our neighbourhood and helped me to see where other people are struggling. And also, being in the mining industry with a focus on safety, I think it's really important at this time to be safety ambassadors in your street, whether that's with PPE while you're mowing or doing the yard work, or just looking out for others that might be doing unsafe things. So I think this is a great opportunity to connect with our neighbours and build a strong and supportive local community. And it's also an opportunity to live out our values in our neighbourhood. So I'd really encourage you to get out and to get to know your neighbours in this time and to help support them. So as we move into the webinar, there's quite a few more attendees that came online then. Thank you for joining. Today's topic is going to be solving site challenges from the home office. Now we'll have 3 sections of talks by 2 presenters, and at the end there will be time for a Q&A. There'll be quite a significant time for question and answers. And so I'd just like to remind you all to on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a bar that has Q&A written there. And please submit your questions. We want to get as many questions from the audience as possible. And that will reduce the amount of Dorothy Dicks that I ask. Also, another reminder that this will be recorded. So if you want to go back and review the slides, we will send out a link following the webinar. So don't worry about screenshotting or anything like that during the webinar. Just sit back and relax, I guess. So now, as an introduction, we've got 2 presenters, Greg Lane and Matt Palm. Greg Lane is the Chief Technical Officer at Ausenco. He has over 30 years experience in operations, engineering, design, study, and project management. He fosters a value-adding culture here at Ausenco and has done so for the last 10 to 15 years. He's really passionate about cost-effective, fit-for-purpose design, and he's been able to achieve that in many regions around the world. For instance, Constantia, where he delivered a $800 million MPV uplift, and Phu Cam in Laos, where he delivered a benchmark low-cost concentrator. And there's many other good examples across the world where his fingerprint has gone into creating that low-cost concentrator. And Matt Pyle, he's Director of Technical Solutions here at Ausenco, and he has over 10 years experience in process and mechanical design. His particular interests are tailings dewatering, where he's done some really interesting work recently on eco-tails, and technologies where he focuses on coarse particle flotation, such as the project at Cadia, and bulk ore sorting. And he is passionate about developing growth pathways for existing and new operations. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Jen. So there are three subsections in this seminar. First, the push and pull factors, which will be presented by Greg Lane, looking at the universal market drivers to get workers off-site. Second, Matt is going to be presenting the adding value remotely and why and how we are able to do that. Third, successes and failures, some case studies where we can get examples for lessons learned. And then finally, we will go into a panel discussion, hopefully. So please submit as many questions using that Q&A tab on the right, and we'll get stuck into them. So over to you, Greg, first section. You're on mute, Greg. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Everyone can now hear me, and welcome to my home office. Very pertinent, and you can see the teddy bears that belong to my granddaughter behind me. I'm going to talk about some of the push and pull factors, and I'm going to talk to it from both an Ausenco perspective and from the perspective of, in my spare time, I'm a non-executive director of a small operating company. So the recent issues with COVID-19 have certainly hit home in that area, particularly around what we can do at site, what can't be done at site, and what needs to be done externally. A photo there is a photo of the tailings dam at Phu Cam in Laos. Project that, as Grant mentioned, we delivered, and it still remains one of the benchmarks of cost effectiveness in design and engineering. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, COVID-19 has really reinforced the need for diversity, and in so doing, we're all moving away from, let's say, normal working practice over the last 40 years prior to COVID-19. The increase in computer connectivity, computing power, the implementation cost for the communication systems, has allowed many services to be delivered from offsite, and indeed from one's granddaughter's bedroom. So, examples of that in the grand sense come from the majors of BHP and Rio with their remote mining operations, truck driving, and of course BHP's Chilean remote operations centre, which is up and running. But the key aspects and the things that have really hit the media recently have been around big data analysis. Big data gives you an opportunity to analyse the massive information that's now available from sites. The flip side of big data is that it can give you exactly the wrong answer. So getting expertise into the analysis cycle is absolutely critical to get the right solutions. And that can be done remotely, but it needs to be done remotely with that expert input. Ausenco's had remote maintenance planning capability for a long time through our Ralston group and through our Ralston 8 software packages. And of course, that's really empowered by the amount of instrumentation and the amount of analysis that can flow out of the data that comes from that instrumentation at site. So the value of the data that you get is really reflected by the value of the instrumentation that you have, how much effort you put into maintaining that instrumentation, how much effort you put into people at site who do that work. So it's not just about looking at data remotely. At site, you still need to maintain high quality people. You still need to maintain the right focus and look at what can be done on site and what really should be the focus of on-site activity versus off-site activity. Remote training, of course, many institutions can deliver remote training. What we'd like to focus on is remote expert training, mentoring, making sure that the younger generations who now seem to make up most of the people at sites can benefit from expertise. Who should they talk to, and how should they talk to the various mentors that are in the industry and available to them? And of course, running an operation is all about getting the maximum cash flow, and maximum cash flow is linked to throughput in most plants, but in complex plants, it's also about performance of individual unit operations and how they interrelate to one another. I have not been to an operation where throughput and performance cannot be substantially improved. So every operation can benefit from review, from insight, from external expertise. That's particularly pertinent, as we move forward over the years. There are fewer people coming into our industry, and those people need to access the expertise that's available, things that have been learnt over many years. Next slide, please. Hello, there we go. So, if I put on my operator's hat, and my experience over the years has been that it's one thing to present an opportunity to an operation or the operation management. It's another to actually convince them and build the trust that facilitates provision of services from external parties, and particularly remote external parties. Now, there have been occasions where, certainly over a number of times during my experience, where I've identified poor practices on site, and that's resulted in adverse outcomes for the incumbent management, simply because they haven't been able to see the opportunities themselves, and the opportunities have been recognised by their bosses, their upper management within their business, and of course they've brought in a consultant, and the consultant's pointed out the opportunities, and there's been an adverse impact on the local management. That's a real issue. So as consultants, we need to avoid that. We need to work with people and empower those people. And I always say, make our clients look good. That really needs to limit, that behaviour needs to limit loss of control and manage loss of control. So we're there to help people. We're not there to take things away. But when I talk to managers at site, mill superintendents, mill concentrator managers, there is a real concern about how do we build trust? How do they trust parties they don't know about, they haven't worked with before? And really the secret to that is take small bites, do small bits of work first, then build a relationship. All comes down to maintaining effective communications, but those effective communications are really built on defining the scope of the work to be done. Even if it's a small piece of work, it's a good idea to have a written scope. And that's a big difference when you're working a concentrator manager or a senior metallurgist on site or a maintenance manager. You can talk to your people, and scope definition is by conversation or by work order. Scope definition with external parties needs to be much more rigorous, so that there is that alignment, that there is that understanding, and that we make sure that both the site party and the external parties deliver on what they say they're going to do. The site parties provide the information, the external consultants deliver on what they've promised they will deliver on. If you do that, you're going to de-risk the project. You're going to increase net revenue. You're going to increase operating margins. But it's all about building trust. So in that regard, the next slide, please. The little diagram there shows the secret to success in my experience. You know, as a consultant or as a service deliverer, it's all about listening. And of course, as I move throughout the world, one of the things that empowers Australians in the international market is that we're not scared to challenge our clients and what people say. And but in that challenging process, it's all about alignment. It's all about making sure that when we listen to our clients, when we listen to what's being said at sites, we come away with a fully aligned objective and feeds back into that scope of work, understand what scope's being offered, what scope needs to be delivered on. So the key there is building trust, and of course, if we deliver on that scope, then it's back to the next stage of work, and the listening, alignment, challenging, and trust and delivering process goes on and on. Having done that, you're all in one tent. So you have that mutual risk and reward model sorted out, and you're focused on effective communications. One of the outcomes of being a consultant is that many consultants deliver good ideas, but they don't deliver the solution with an implementation plan that makes it easy for our clients to move forward with that plan. And it's absolutely key that within Ausenco, we provide a fully documented, resourced approach from our chairs in our home offices or in our business office that allows our client to see what is involved with implementing the full solution. There's no just providing an idea, because the last thing a concentrator manager wants or a mining manager wants is the spark of an idea. He has 50 ideas a day. He needs a plan, or she needs a plan and a strategy and a fully resourced method to implementing those ideas and solutions. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities? Well, we mentioned remote operating centres, and that's at the big end of town. There's big dollars involved in setting those up, but there are smaller elements of that. As I said, mentoring, home offices, connecting people. Ausenco can provide senior people that can connect with site and metallurgy teams and provide expert advice on how to attack problems and deliver solutions. The throughput optimization is a fantastic way to leverage low-cost expertise. Remote training and technical assistance is part of that. We see an opportunity for technical planning and management where the site is stressed from fighting fires. And that's a big part of plant operation, just firefighting, the things that come up every day. Well, we can take that strategic element, that strategic work, and put technical planning and management around that. And of course, we'll continue to deliver our maintenance planning through our Rolston group. And Rajiv Chandramohan is endeavouring to kick off our data analytics team based out of Canada. So at that point, I'll pass over to Maddie, and Maddie can talk about the interesting stuff, some of our experiences and some examples. Thanks, Maddie.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Grant, for the introductions earlier. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. You are joining me from my home office in northern Brisbane. Today, I wanted to highlight how we go about adding value and why we do it, and let you in a little bit on the trade secrets, the recipe for success, I guess, and the highlight maybe some of the issues that can cause or lead to failure. So why do we add value remotely? Well, we think differently. We believe in what we do. We're honestly out there to try and find a better way. And as Grant pointed out earlier, people like Greg have fostered that culture through the business. So we're supported, I guess, top down with that approach to just not accept the status quo. So to do that, we grow the culture, and we look to strategically hire the most talented people that we can, and we put them in diverse teams where people tend to work well together. And that, I think, that difference of perspective adds a lot to any particular problem that we're trying to solve. And as a remote services provider, as an engineering company, we've always added value, and it's as with any engineering, it tends to be remote from the place where the project is. So I guess remote value add is not something new to us. So when we look at the value that we've added previously, as I guess a bit of an example, next slide, please. We look at the capital cost of plants, and this is something we've done for a long time. And this slide here is really just to demonstrate what is possible when you put the right people in the right sort of room, real or virtual, and give them the right ingredients for success. And so this slide is demonstrating that with the right mix and culture and attitudes, you can save a lot of steel and concrete in when we're looking to try and reduce the capital cost of plants. But the same approach also has an operating cost benefit. And next slide, please. And the operating cost benefit is, I guess, exemplified here in the Moose River project that was completed 18 months, 2 years ago, roughly. And this project was a gold project in Canada, 2 million tonne per year gold plant that sort of used some of our previous experience in this area. And you can see it's achieving best-in-class capital cost or operating cost performance, I should say. So, the method applies in a range of different ways. So I guess talk a little bit about the principles and why these projects are successful. It really comes down to an approach called basically theory of constraints, which is based on a book by a guy called Eli Goldratt that he wrote that 20 or 30 years ago. But it talks about how you can look at a problem or look at a mine site or a process plant and deconstrain that process plant to add more value. So the book was originally written for manufacturing plants, but a lot of the methods apply equally well to minerals processing as they do to manufacturing. And the concepts are pretty simple. They make sense, but they're often misunderstood. And I'll take the next couple of minutes just to talk about what they are and how we focus on them and how we use that to add value remotely. So some common constraints within the mining operations are the physical constraints. So that's things like the equipment, the capacity of the equipment, how well it's used, how well it's maintained, maybe people on site, which is particularly topical at the moment, and supply of maybe reagents, grinding media, and maybe even just spare space for doing things, footprint, for example. So they can all constrain the ability of adding value or the value chain on a mining operation. Secondly, there's policies, which is things like how things must be done. So there might be contracts or regulations that really can't be changed. There's not much flexibility there. But sometimes there is some room in the way certain things are interpreted or done. The third point is really the key one here, which is where we see most of the value add, and that's challenging the paradigms. So paradigms are those deeply ingrained beliefs or habits, maybe someone who's worked on the site for 30 or 40 years and really only seen it done a certain way. One of the benefits of engaging people like Greg and Grant is that they've been to lots of different sites and they've seen lots, got a really diverse range of experience. And that's largely true for a lot of people within Ausenco. So the ability to take what is done or the good parts of what is done elsewhere and apply them to new sites that maybe haven't seen them before really can add a lot of value. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide or two. The fourth constraint is the market. And this is a pretty rare one. It applies to manufacturing, not so much to mining, but sometimes rarely it does. There was a project that we've been working on for the last year or two that was producing scandium. And that project was actually going to double the market supply. So sometimes you can come up against a market constraint. So to focus a little bit more on the paradigms, well, and this explains roughly how we add the value. One of the key issues is that changing the paradigms is not that simple. Next slide, please. Part of the problem is that everyone with different roles focuses in different areas. So mine managers focus on utilisation, metallurgists, of which I'm a trained metallurgist. Everyone naturally focuses on recovery because that's largely what we're trained to do. Mill managers focus on throughput. Maintenance managers are looking for minimum operating costs and maximising the time between shutdowns. And any project work is trying to minimise the capital costs. And within those, there's actually KPIs that people's bonuses get structured on, and they generally don't align. And we've known that for some time. It's I guess how mine to mill came about. But the goal is really just to increase the project value. And to be clear on what exactly that means, the project is not just the process plant, but it's the entire value chain. Next slide, please. So that means everything from exploration through to transport, refining, smelting and selling, and everything in between. So in other words, it's no good just drawing a box around the process plant or the mills or flotation or leaching and saying we're going to optimize that part in a silo. Really, it's got to consider the whole value story, and it'll drive you to quite different answers. And Greg highlighted this a little bit, but if we've got a low-grade deposit, it's really about maximising throughput and reducing those incremental operating costs. But a high-value feed source, like an underground mine with high-grade gold, is all about recovery and optimising the unit operations. So the whole value chain drives you to quite different answers depending on what you're trying to do, and that's really critical for adding value to operating sites. You've got to know which type of site you're at. Next slide, please. So that's what project means, and value means different things to different people, but at the end of the day, depending on, almost irrespective of how you measure it, and there's a few ways to measure it here, it all comes down to maximising the cash at a minimum capital cost. Next slide. And to just, I guess, elaborate on that a little bit further, if we're going to take in the real big picture view of the world, well, we need to consider the risks and consequences of doing things certain ways versus other ways. But look, from the purposes of an equation, it's really quite simple. It's grow revenue, shrink capital cost, and shrink operating cost, and that'll grow cash flow. And that equation really applies to any business. So it's quite a powerful way of thinking. So if we look at the specifics of what we actually do, I won't talk through all these, but we have lots of experienced people across multiple disciplines who can help manage workloads on site. So we've seen some of our clients having trouble getting people to site. So it raises the questions like which activities are currently done on site could actually be done remotely or could be done maybe by different external parties remotely. Some of our sites we work with have a high turnover, which is a combination of sort of social pressures that I guess society is facing and the number of people available that are coming out of universities, for example. So sometimes having an external party can provide a better continuity of knowledge. We've got access to experts, and there's a whole bunch of services that we can provide that include everything from small jobs, which are really good for building trust, like daily reporting, through to some of the bigger value optimization projects, which I'll provide some examples of shortly. So if those are the services we offer, it's really important to reiterate how it's done, because the right services implemented the wrong way really don't provide any solution. And you know, the cases that we have seen before, which are really a failure, is consultants that come in, and we've been guilty of this occasionally before, provided some fantastic results and recommendations that then sit within a report, maybe filed in a shelf for a couple of years, collecting dust rather than actually doing useful work on site. So this diagram shows a method to avoid that problem, really. So the first part, as Greg outlined, is really to engage with the site and build the trust, because without that first sort of base of the pyramid, then there's really no point going any further. Because you might identify all these great ideas, but there's a fair chance they won't go anywhere. So we start small, we start engaging with site on a regular and frequent basis, and then we look within the task that we're actually set, we spend a bit of time just getting our experts involved and just saying, well, what are the opportunities sideways? What is sitting there? What's some low-hanging fruit that we can look to grab to see that we can sort of get some quick wins? So we'll identify the skills that we've got within the company and look to sort of just on the side, very high level, see where there might be a rabbit hole to sort of look down and see if there's anything in it without, too much detail. Once we've identified some solutions, then it's all about planning them and prioritizing them and working out which ones are actually real in the context of the site. If there's some quick and easy wins, that's always the first place to go, because there's nothing worse than getting a long way into a project with nothing to show for it. So it's all about how do we continue to build trust? Here's some quick and easy wins that we can get some runs on the board, if you like. Then the more difficult sort of medium-term problems, they require more planning and implementation, and that needs to be quite heavily involved with site. They often involve budgets, resources, plans, and then you need to know that once they're happening, how are they going to be successful? So that sometimes means we develop operator log sheets to start tracking new parameters around the site that are really worth focusing on. So it's in ways like that that we actively engage and can report back on outcomes and the successes thereof to make sure we're just not wasting everyone's time and money. So next, I want to talk through how this approach applies and how it's led to some successes mostly, examples and lessons learned. Next slide, please. So the first site I'd like to talk about is a small copper concentrator in North Queensland that we're fortunate enough to be really well engaged with this site because we have people on the ground actually running this site. So keeping the communication up is easier here than it is with a typical external style engagement. But in the last 18 months, 2 years, since we've been involved, there's been quite a few good wins. Like I said, we tried to focus on the short wins up front or short-term wins, and we realised there were some immediate opportunities simply with underused power in the comminution circuit. So it's not really rocket science, to be perfectly honest, but the skill is not in the idea. The skill is in actually implementing it and making it work. So there's a range of things that we did to achieve this short-term debottlenecking of the milling circuit, but it basically meant making sure we use all the equipment to the best of its capacity. Once we'd had the short-term wins, which were particularly critical for this client to get the project up and running, we were able to focus on some medium-term and long-term benefits. And in those, we implemented some better mill control strategies, and we were able to engage with suppliers and site to change out the internals of the mills to improve their performance. We also identified through the weekly reporting and weekly monthly reporting that there are a range of pinch points for the circuit in terms of runtime. So we were able to engage project services to support site with a minimalist team on site to actually implement those as much as possible remotely. Then when there was work that needed to be done on site, well, we could augment that as well on a sort of short-term basis. Despite the throughput increases, we're also able to achieve recovery improvement during the same time. And that's come from test work management, looking at the specific reagents, the flow sheet, some flow sheet changes and things like that. So at this point, a lot of the low-hanging fruit we've managed to grab, but there's still a lot on the table that we're working through. So there's some longer-term optimization, and that's more about better understanding the geometallurgy in the mine, working more closely with the mining team to really break down that interface and work out how both can be optimized together through to the market, really. And we'll continue to assess the constraints as we continue to sort of improve on them. The next case study I wanted to talk about briefly was another large copper concentrator. Well, this was a larger concentrator in North Queensland, and we were engaged a couple of years ago to do some remote test work support or test work management. So we started that, and the job was really looking at some future ores that weren't expected to be directly related to the current ores. But lo and behold, when we did the test work on the ores, we found some trends that were interesting, and then we went back and we tested those particular trends against the existing ores, and we found that there was a benefit from grinding finer. A couple of % recovery was possible, and that led to a business case quite quickly that has led to a project that's nearing completion. And then more recently, we've been looking at more complicated future ores and developing more suited reagent schemes and flow sheets to deal with those more challenging ore types. And again, we found that those solutions actually apply really well to the current ores and are an opportunity to improve recovery for that site. And for that site, to put it in context, a 1% recovery is about $1 million a month. So really the return on investment is very high for some of this style of work. And again, it comes down to not looking at the specific problem all the time that maybe we're tasked with, but branching a little bit sideways and thinking outside the box. How could this solution apply to the current operation, not just future ores, for example? The next few slides I'll talk through pretty quickly, but they're just to explain that this is something that we've done a lot of. And I guess we hear a lot of companies talking about the benefits of remote operation. They might be saving some labour costs, or they might be saving fuel burn in trucks or maintenance costs, and they're all good. But the benefits that we see with some of those improvements are 3, 4, 5% maybe, sometimes maybe more. But the point of these next few slides is just to show the scale of opportunity that is out there on some of these sites that seem to be doing everything right. And it's not that they're not necessarily, it's just that sometimes you need to look at the problems a slightly different way or take learnings from somewhere else. So the first case study is talking about Fukam, where we worked with a site, engaged really well there for a reasonable period of time, and managed to achieve over a 25% improvement in throughput for the hard ores. And that was just looking at, again, where is there spare capacity in the circuit and how do we modify the circuit to use that? There was also an element of training that came into that, which was particularly important. For another large copper mine in Chile, we were able to implement some advanced process control, which helped stabilise the mill operation, and that, in conjunction with better on-site training of how to run the circuit for different ore types, led to a 12% increase in throughput, that 200 tonne an hour benefit. The next study is a slightly different bent. This was looking at maintenance or asset management. So as Greg highlighted, we've got an asset management group that is actually rolling out proprietary software across one of the major worldwide mining companies in multiple commodities. And the approach to maintenance that is sort of central to that software allowed the Energy Century mine to save about 17% worth of their sustaining capital costs as they were ramping down the plant. So we backed ourselves in this case because we saw the opportunities and we knew what they were, and these maintenance practice approaches we saw had value. And so it was sort of a risk reward contract. If we didn't deliver the savings, then we weren't going to be paid. So there was a good saving of about close to $40 million through this approach. And again, return on investment for the amount of labour or service costs to provide those savings was really high. The next site, this is an example. This was published in the SAG conference last year, so you can go and read the paper, or if you want it, I'm more than happy to send it to you. Rajiv was working on this one with Greg and others. And this was, again, just changing the paradigms around the way the circuit was running. Particularly, it coincided with a change in ore types, and it meant that there was some opportunity on the table that we're able to capitalise on, and there's still more work ongoing at that site. And the last case study I wanted to highlight was another large gold mine in Papua New Guinea, where through a sort of mine-to-mill approach and understanding the ore types, we're able to add roughly 25% additional throughput to the plant. So just highlighting, I mean, there's some successes, but there's obviously things that go wrong. It doesn't work all the time. The common causes of failure that we see is providing a recommendation rather than a solution. So if we haven't got that ongoing engagement, then a recommendation can really just sit on a shelf and collect dust for a while. That can be caused by a lack of trust or poor communication and relationships. Sometimes just different personality types don't work well together. So it's about getting the right people together to work with our client teams in the best way possible. And these are sometimes not intuitive for technical folk, let's say, who have specific or focused interests and are sometimes not always the best communicators in what they're trying to say. And, you know, if the external or even internal team that's working remotely doesn't deliver the right thing at the right time, then the trust erodes much faster in a remote working arrangement than it does in a face-to-face arrangement. So I hope these slides have given you some background on what's required to successfully add value remotely, and also the things to watch out for on maybe why it's not working successfully for you at the moment. Obviously, these times are trying, and with the challenges of getting more people on site, there's an increased push to sort of do work off-site where possible. But the benefits in that are real and tangible and maybe larger than you think, particularly if you can get the right people with sort of diverse skill sets and diverse experience working on your problems who may have seen it before and be able to bring that experience to the table. So I might pass back to Grant for the Q&A session now.
Thank you, Matt and Greg, for those presentations. Getting a few questions coming in, but I'd like to get some more. So if you do have some questions, please submit those in the Q&A tab on the right. We're going to move into a time of panel discussion, answering some of those questions. And I've got a lot of questions myself, but you guys probably don't want to hear from me as much as the other attendees. So yeah, there's a couple of points there on each one of the presentation that I just put down just to recap what was said in each one of those. But to begin with, I thought there was a really good question here from Malcolm Powell, targeted to Greg to begin with, but I think Matt might have some input on this as well. So Greg, you were talking about big data and the fact that data isn't useful on its own unless it's used with understanding. And Malcolm's question was in line with that. What is your view on missing data or data that isn't collected or can't be measured on site, and also misleading data? These are obviously common in operating sites where sensors either don't work or you can't measure specific things that you need to measure on site. What's your view on that, and how to get through this, make the best use of the big data that is coming out on site?
Well, I'm sure from Malcolm's perspective, he sometimes gets annoyed that the engineers in the world don't design plants so that you can measure everything. You know, we're constrained by a budget and by the need to deliver a money-making machine to our clients. And those considerations don't always include the capability to sample everything and to measure everything that we would like. So there's always a bit of a give and take on that, depending on budget. But, you know, there have been many occasions in the past where, you know, expertise has been required to recognise false information. And, you know, whether that be false data from something simple like pump temperature or pressure or a flow rate, you know, the ability to actually recognise that information is wrong adds significant value to the analysis process. And I'm sure Matt's got some examples where that's occurred.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm, and thanks for joining. To answer the first part of your question there, missing data, the thing that interests me is, I mean, what Greg is saying is right. There's not always justification to measure everything up front in a new plant. But where there's a business case, that's a very good argument to get the right instrumentation installed. So we've found quite a lot that, you know, there's probably more value in small data. It's, I guess, an 80-20 rule there, where small amount of 20% of the data can probably present 80% of the value. So if you haven't got that minimum 20%, there might be a really good business case to do it. The second example, we were talking about this recently, but one of our clients actually had good data, but just interpreted it completely the wrong way. And the specific case was they had a complex ore body with basically well-performing ores and very challenging ores. And the very nice clean ores achieved higher recoveries and high concentrate grades. And the very difficult ores achieved low recoveries and low concentrate grades. And looking at that data, which was completely true and honest the wrong way, led a particular analyst to conclude that higher concentrate grades will give higher recoveries. It was an artifact of the data, but basic metallurgy would suggest obviously higher concentrate grades for a given ore type will give lower recoveries. So you can have all the right data and just look at it the wrong way and tie yourself in knots, really.
That's a really good example there of where data's been used without understanding to come to, I guess, the exact wrong conclusion. There's also lots of examples of where data's been collated and just because there's been a correlation doesn't mean there's causation. So the temperature and of, I don't know, some cell somewhere in the plant correlating to throughput or something like that. There's a lot of those cases around. So I guess that comes back to Greg's initial comment on using data with understanding as being critical. I guess one associated question that I had for you, Greg, was talking about critical instrumentation. You mentioned that as we transition into offsite control, there's going to be the need for new instrumentation. What do you see as the most critical instrumentation that might need to be added to a site as we go into offsite control?
That's a fairly pertinent question for me with my other hat on. That other operation that I said I was a non-exec director of, parent company, that's a fairly old plant now that has some instrumentation that's in its day was quite significant and in fact led the world. But that was 1989, and we're now 2019, and things have moved on. So just about every aspect of that plant needs to be reconsidered in terms of where is the value, what instruments are updated, what do we do with the DCS, how do we manage the data flow and get the maximum value we can from data analysis. And to be absolutely honest, it needs to be broken down into how much money can you spend. So, the key things are the things that drive planning and revenue prediction. So that might be throughput, it's metallurgical accounting, it's the key operating parameters within the plant, be it a cyclone pressure can sometimes be very important, or a mass flow or a volume flow somewhere can be very important. But then as you go deeper and deeper, you're getting into motor temperatures, and you're getting into might be the gland pressure on specific pumps. It could be the actual operating pressure on specific pumps. So there are layers upon layers upon layers to that question, and it really comes down to how much money do you need to spend and how good are you at prioritising to answer the key questions around, firstly, business value maximisation, and then the need to provide information for ongoing improvement. And that's not only in the metallurgical sense, that's in the maintenance planning sense as well. And how do you evaluate what's important? It's a tough question, and it's different for every plant.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that. And please keep the questions coming through. At this stage, we've got about another 10 minutes or so of panel discussion, but please keep those questions coming through. So I've got a question here for Matt. Really interesting to see at the end there you had your lessons learned and where errors can come into the process. I was just wondering whether you could whether you had any concrete methods that can be used to cross that chasm that exists between a study report, or can exist between a study report. As you said, sometimes they stay on shelves for a long period of time, and crossing into project implementation. You gave a good method there. I was just wondering whether you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. It's an interesting one. Sometimes we work with clients who are extremely capable and very good at implementing solutions once they have the idea. So they might be well supported with teams either on site or remotely who can really just take the idea and run with it. But in my experience, that's not the norm. That's probably 10 or 20% of the clients we work with. The vast majority probably tend to have, and this is, I think, a human trait as much as anything, but expectations, or they sort of think they can deliver more than they can. But what inadvertently happens when you're on a site is the day-to-day issues dominate the priorities, and so they should, by the way. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it inadvertently means that the recommendations stay as just that, which is really the problem. So your question around sort of how do you sort of bridge that divide is about making sure that there's really clear plans on implementation, and making sure that the engagement doesn't stop with the report, because any report or solution will go stale after a period of time, and the knowledge will get lost, and people are trying to ramp up and remember what they did. Whereas keeping things ticking over in the background via implementation plans and in sort of more collaborative working is a much better way to get the solution to actually be implemented.
That's a great answer. I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that we're not just wanting to deliver a long report, but that the aim of everything that we do is in implementation and pulling that through. And a lot of that has to do with people issues and dealing with people. And I guess one thing that Greg raised was the importance of trust between the engineers and the site team. And I was just wondering whether you might be able to, Greg, if you might be able to give any examples, and Matt probably has some examples as well here, of where you've been able to develop trust with a client. Maybe a client that where they're on site and the project has come out of head office or something like that. And what are the steps that went into developing that trust? And what is key to developing that trust with those people on site?
Yeah, thanks. It's different for every client. It's always challenging when you're working for a head office and you arrive on site and you've got to build bridges with people you don't know. I suppose I leverage very strongly off the fact that I've got lots of grey hair and I've been around for a while, so a lot of people know me, but there's always times where you go to site and there's no personal relationship, and that's where that listening and gentle challenging process comes into its own. Trying to say as little as possible for the first period of a conversation. It might be 10 minutes, or it might be half an hour, or it might be the whole morning. It's very important where you're just taking in what a client wants and trying to pick up on what the key drivers are, and then gently challenging those so that you can explore and build confidence that you can provide the right solution. And then in the afternoon or after an hour or however long that period is, then you're starting to present your ideas that are the aligned scope for how a problem can be solved or how an opportunity can be addressed. I really do feel that, if a consultant is working for a client, then you have to spend a lot of time listening and developing the ability to be insightful and see through what may be an apparent issue, but the actual issue may be hidden, and that challenging process is paramount when those issues are hidden from plain sight.
That's very good, and I think one of the things that kind of aligns with that, and it comes from a question that's just been delivered, and aligns with what Matt was saying about KPIs and in his talk. Sam Palanandi, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the question. How important, and I'll push this through to Matt. How important is understanding the customer's KPIs, both organizational and individual, in gaining that trust and getting those projects across to implementation and actually adding value to those individuals as well?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. It's really interesting. KPIs is an interesting question because they are often, like I said, based in paradigms, and they're not always mutually complementary across an organisation. So they certainly need to be, because they have personal impacts on people, you sort of need to treat them with a fair bit of respect. But you do sort of sometimes need to mould and shape that in the context of, well, what's the value that we're really trying to add? And if that's the ultimate goal or the light at the end of the tunnel, then there should be a mechanism to redistribute, the KPIs to sort of align better with a common goal. And I think maybe just to add to that, it's interesting when we look at the different organisations we work for and how they manage risk, because KPIs are related to risk, but they're also related to trust. So when we look at certain sites that look to manage risk through, let's say, call it bureaucratic systems or red tape, really that's a risk management process. But it's only one way to do a risk management process, and it can take a long time. It can be slow and cumbersome, and it doesn't foster trust. It's almost based in a lack of trust ethos. Whereas if you look at the most forward-thinking organisations at the moment, maybe the Googles or Teslas, if you've read into any of that, you can see that the way that they're working is really about more collaboration, open and honest communication, and fostering trust. And that's not through red tape. So I think they're all related. The sort of the KPIs, the business structures, the way that different companies work together needs to be aligned. And it's not necessarily easy, but definitely needs to be front of mind. So thanks, Sam, for that question.
Thanks, Matt, for your answer there. Unfortunately, we're right near the end of time here. There's been a few more questions that have been sent through around contact time versus remote work and volumes of site data and how to best analyze that either on-site or with off-site capabilities. I think we'll answer those individually with those people in emails. But I'd like to thank you all for coming in. Unfortunately, we're out of time now, but I'll encourage you to join the next webinar as well. So there'll be an email that gets sent around, firstly with the recording of this webinar, and then also with some details following of the subsequent webinars. So we're going to be doing quite a few of these, getting into some technical details of different opportunities as well. So please dial in next time, and it was great to have you on the call. Thank you very much. And thank you, Greg and Matt.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.